I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. We often look at high-performing cultures through the lens of results, the championships, the IPOs, and the efficiency. But what if the real metric of a successful organization isn't just how it performs, but how it helps the people within it come alive? Today, the author of The Culture Code, Daniel Coyle, joins us to discuss his new book, Flourish. We're moving beyond the boardroom to explore how we build environments of belonging, joy, and vitality in our work, our families, and our communities. My interview with Daniel Coyle is coming right up. But first, Daniel Coyle, welcome to On Brand.
Good to be here with you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to chat. You know, we go way back, as you might say. You were the keynote speaker at the ACT Workforce Conference in Chicago that I was helping to organize. And in preparation for this conversation, I actually found my copy of the Talent Code.
No way.
And I thought, did he write inside it? And I opened it up, and it actually says the Westergaard Code.
Well, there you go. This is your book, man.
Now I know I feel enormously talented as a result of this, but beyond that unique inscription, I also, from that event, whether you know it or not, as I teach leadership communication and specifically the unique practice of slide design, talk about you. And I tell the story because you had all sorts of great stories that you talk about, and videos that you showed and things on screen. But then there was a point where you told a story and you had a blank slide. And I remember in our tech rehearsal, you were going through that. And you said, oh, that's a blank slide. It's supposed to be there. And it's because I want the audience to not look at what's on screen, but to focus on me. And I thought, wow, that's powerful. Not enough people do that. And I've since used that as a great lesson. But the caveat was, you explained it to me. I, in my role as helping to organize that event, did not explain it to my client. And during your keynote, he feverishly made his way over to my table and said, Nick, Coyle's slides aren't working. No, it's all good. It's all good. So I give that advice, but I explain that if there's someone else that might be worried by anything not appearing on screen, you should definitely tell them.
Yeah. Right. I'm so flattered you remember that. That was a great time. And it is, I think about that. I guess, we're here to talk about leadership, and there are some, it's about guiding attention in some ways, creating a condition where the right signal can get through our cluttered world where people are tempted to look everywhere, but creating conditions where there's a little bit of clarity. It feels like clarity is hard to find these days. I don't know how you feel about that, Nick, but it feels like it's, as the world continues to speed up, and clarity are those things that give us energy and point us the right direction. And it's like those moments are precious, and how to create them is a very great mystery that continues to be a mystery in this world.
Well, and I think, I talk about how distracted and cluttered everything is. But what you just said too, even with something as simple as slide design, directing attention, it really sets up your book, your work with Flourish, because kind of the foundation of that is these two often almost warring or a tug of war between them systems of attention. And I wonder if you'd talk us through those and what it means as we struggle to find meaning today.
I know. Well, it's fascinating. I mean, I spent 5 years visiting these places where there were impossible amounts of sort of meaningful, joyful growth. That's the definition of flourish. These places that are producing that. So the question is, they're talking like little town in Vermont that produces all these Olympic champions, and they all go back there to live afterwards, or this little deli that grows into a giant $90 million community of businesses that is just impossibly thriving. And what's going on in those places? Why do they feel so different? And when you realize when you walk there, when you spend time there, is they're paying attention in a different way. I always thought that when you use the word attention, when I say that word, we think of one thing. We think of focus. We think of focus. That's what we think of. But in fact, we have that deeply, deeply wrong. When you look at the science, what you find is that attention is made up of two systems. One of them is narrow. It's for controlling. It's tightly focused. It's about seeing and controlling what's going on. Evolutionarily speaking, it's how we grab food. Categorize, grab, judge. But there's a second form of attention, which is more designed for navigating the whole world. It's called relational attention. It's connective attention. It's very broad. It's about meaning and nuance. It's not like a spotlight. It's more like a lantern that illuminates everything. And this is where relationships are born. This is where stories are born. This is where brands actually exist, not as something you control, but it's something that you're in living relationship with. And the ability to activate that relational attention. And in a way, just zooming out for a second, it's what this is really about is our attentional health in some ways. Like we know that we live in a world that is not attentionally healthy. Staring at your screen all the time, being in focused attention makes you feel crappy, and it creates a world where people are divided. And the challenge of today is that we're now realizing that attentional health, just like nutritional health, like we know that there are three food groups. Like we know that you should balance between these different food groups if you want. If you just eat sugar, you will not feel good. And attentionally, we're realizing that you have to have a balance and you have to have a foundation of relational attention with some focused attention in there too. And these places sort of give us a blueprint, I would argue, a blueprint for doing that. They're creating spaces where we can feel ourselves being pulled into stories that are bigger than ourselves. They're creating spaces where we can not just be in this narrow, gimme, gimme, gimme sort of focus, but in a broader relational focus. And they do that extremely deliberately, with a lot of intentionality. One of the places that did it, incredibly well is this deli in Ann Arbor called Zingerman's that some of your listeners may have been to. Famously wonderful place. And I happened to be there on a day when they were orienting new employees, and they, instead of most orientations, you sort of expect it to be about a transmission of information from the company to the employees. Like, here, welcome, here's the key, here's the answer key, here's what you need to know, here's our mission, here's our beliefs, here's our purpose, here's our programs. And at Zingerman's, they just completely flip it to where it becomes like the CEO walks in and asks the people, the new employees, like, what's your story? How'd you get here? Tell me about that. And now I'd like you guys to get in little groups and talk about what your dreams are after Zingerman's. And then he sends a message that all of our systems are imperfect. We need you to really look at us and recognize we're making mistakes. We need you to make us better. And they flip this, what normally is kind of this narrow interaction, into this they feel themselves being pulled into a bigger story. They feel themselves, their relational attention is clicking on. And so those moments, constructing those moments with intentionality where people can sort of surrender to something bigger than themselves. That's what those places were super good at. And it was like, you can call it creating a brand, you can call it creating a story, you can call it leadership. But basically what it is, it's connective energy.
Yeah.
Like they're able to create connective energy. And that's why they're able to build these ecosystems of connection, meaning, purpose, and joy, because that is driven by connective energy.
So you mentioned connective energy, and much of my work since we last met is focused on story. I lead a program called Story Lab here at the University of Iowa, and so many of the different examples cited in the book, the deep questions, Peter Block, the people of Vorstadt are really, and Zingerman's are about people coming together and sharing stories and ultimately building something bigger. And it's kind of that 1-2 of connection, story, meaning that then almost enables the really the second half of the book of
Yeah.
building something bigger.
Yeah.
I feel like we're with the I love the idea of
Hmm.
attentional health, and that we don't. And I feel like because of that, we are missing that first critical step of connection and meaning that is so critical to build anything, whether it's a business or a neighborhood.
Yeah, if you're building anything, you're really growing something, right? We're not talking about machines here. We're talking about living sort of entities, things that have, when we think about our lives, the things that make us come to life, the things where we feel where flourishing actually happens are things that have that same heartbeat to them, which is all these places had this sort of pause. Meaning gets created in a pause. Stories get created in a pause, in moments where you're creating space and you're having an authentic connection. And the thing that happens in those connections is super interesting if we want to drill into that moment, because what's happening is that I think what I saw over and over again was that they were creating what I would call mattering, a moment of mattering. They were seeing the inherent value in the person across from them. They weren't seeing them as a resume. They weren't seeing them as a set of skills. They weren't seeing them as an object to control or an employee to coerce. They were seeing a person, and they were seeing that person who had inherent worth, inherent value. And they would approach that person with curiosity and say, all right, Nick, what's your story? How'd you get here? What do you care about? What do you want to build together? And that question, we go through life thinking that answers are the thing, that answers will get us there. And we're trained in school and we're trained to always have the answers. Well, we now live in an era where answers are as cheap as tap water, right? Where it's easy to get answers. But what makes us come alive are when someone sees the inherent worth we have, and then asks us a question. And that question's always the same question, which is, what's your story? What story? Where'd you come from? And what do you want to build? Like, what do you want to grow to? What do you care about? Let's look forward. What's your horizon, Nick? Tell me. And then you'll ask me the same question. And then pretty soon something's happening in the space between us. And we always talk about the importance of curiosity. We always talk about the importance of courage in leadership. But I think this gives us a sense of the machinery of those moments. And those moments, what does curiosity and courage create? An authentic moment. We always want authentic moments, but the authenticity is not located inside me, and it's not located inside you. It's not whatever like specific thing that I have or specific thing you have. It's about me reaching out with real curiosity. That's the authenticity piece, and real appreciation for who you are, and you doing the same for me. And that's an authentic connection. And it's funny. I mean, it's kind of made on a type of faith that something will emerge when we do that. You can't be sure. You have to almost step into that uncertainty. And that's what I saw over and over again. This willingness that the people you mentioned, Peter Block, Ari Weinswag, they would say, you have value. What should we do together? And it's such a powerful question.
To that end, there is a story you talk about in the training or the new employee orientation, and someone being asked one of those questions. Actually, one of the employees had to leave the room because it was so different than what people usually experience, especially at work.
We walk through the world like kind of being treated as objects and being treated as a bunch of measurable outcomes, right? So when somebody actually takes the time, and that's what they did with this new person who's going to be a truck driver or something for Zingerman's, and they just ask, what do you dream of in the future? What do you want to be? What do you want to grow together? And it was just Ari's not a touchy-feely guy. It wasn't like super emotional, but it was just simply a slight rechanneling of curiosity. And all these moments, the thing that I sort of found myself taking away after visiting all these places was they weren't doing anything magical. They were just gently rechanneling energy and curiosity so that instead of being focused on kind of controlling and having something be certain, just moving into this space of questions. And as a science journalist, I've always been allergic to certain woo-woo phrases, like when someone would say, I'm creating space for you? Like, I never liked that. I always thought that sounded silly. I'm holding
Yeah.
space. I'm
Yeah.
creating
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, it's freaking accurate. It's exactly what they're doing. They are creating room and they're giving you an invitation, which you can take or not. You don't have to take it, but what that woman felt in that moment was invited into the space where someone was genuinely valuing her and genuinely curious about what she wanted to do. And it just opens people up. It's and business and sports and life and everything. It's a connective energy contest. It is not a it's not a machine building. It's you're actually building something that has a feeling of being alive because it is.
On Brand will be right back after this. Now, back to the show. This is, and by the way, I feel very much of the same thinking with holding space, and thought that's a little, but hearing it explained in your book, it's like, oh, that's what that is. Okay, I
Yeah,
get that. That is a thing.
that's the thing.
So the book is so timely, and I feel like I was seeing myself in folks that were struggling with connection in the books, including you mentioned Nick Epley from the University of Chicago, and the whole bus scenario.
Yeah.
And then the fact that it was his life that he then kind of set up a study around. But I was listening to your audiobook and I was thinking, I feel like I'm one of the people that would pick,
Mm.
uh, I don't want to talk to anybody on the bus. I
Yeah.
wonder if you'd
Yeah, no, it's
explain that a
so
little better
fascinating.
than me.
I totally could relate to it too. Right? He was a guy. He used to he's a University of Chicago sociologist. He would take the bus into work, the train into work, and he would see everybody buried in their phones. And this is a relatively new phenomenon, right? This is behavioral modification since these phones came out. But people just kind of so he got curious one day and he started chatting with the person next to him, and that ended up being like the highlight of his day. And so he did an experiment where he had half the people said your job is to just be alone while during your commute, prepare for work. And then he had half the people say your job is to get to know your neighbor. This, and so he asked them before they did it how they would feel about it. And the people who were isolated, who said get prepare by yourself, they thought, "Ooh, I'm going to like that." And the people who said you're going to chat with your neighbor, they thought, "I'm going to hate that. I don't want to do that. Chatting with randos, like no thanks." Okay, then they did it, and then at the end they measured them again. The people who were by themselves, well, they didn't really like it very much. The people who chatted with the strangers, it was the highlight of their day. It was the highlight of their day. And I think it goes to show a few things. Number one, we are terrible at predicting how much we'll enjoy social interaction. We are social creatures. One of my main findings with flourishing is ain't nobody doing it on their own. There's no hermit who's out there flourishing in a cave. It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. We're a social animal. We require other people to bring out the best version of ourselves. Think about times in your life where you've experienced joyful, meaningful growth. Were you alone? No, you were not. You were in a community, in an ecosystem of people. So that's number one. So we're terrible at predicting our enjoyment. And we can almost think of our controlling attention system to go back to that. That controlling attention system loves making judgments and loves jumping to conclusions. And so we tend to conclude that. But the other sort of deeper thing that I think resonated with me is that annoyance is the price of community. Like community is transformative and it's also at times a little tedious. And that's okay. Like we have been entrained on this idea that everything in our life should be frictionless, which is a soulless way to live, work, parent. This idea that your food whoosh shows up at your door, and this idea that everything is a swipe, and it is not a healthy way. It's a very isolating way to live. But the idea that you should embrace some level of annoyance as the price of community, because that's the only way you're going to get community is to embrace some annoyance. Because guess what? We're all annoying to some degree. I'm annoying. You're annoying.
Mhm.
Everybody's a little annoying. And having a little bit of that friction is what makes you come alive.
Well, I see myself in several of the I can throw myself in there. The curmudgeonly types in the book, like the individual who when someone would knock at the door for a cup of borrow some
Mhm.
sugar, let's not tell them we're out, so we don't have to have the interaction. I'm like, I feel like that might be something I might do.
Totally.
But that gives me an opportunity. You talked about being a science journalist. So many things should have cool names, like the teddy bear protocol,
Mm.
to talk about. And the person who didn't want to come to the door for the neighbor's ingredient ended up building something amazing.
Something amazing, right? He was a journalist. He was retired and he sort of saw everybody. He was an introvert, but he saw everybody in his neighborhood kind of being an introvert, kind of like those people on the train and their phones. And so
Yeah.
he did an experiment. He just did an experiment. How do you learn? You don't learn by sitting around reading and you don't learn by analyzing. You learn by doing, period. And so he did this experiment where he put a table down the rented a street, closed off a street, put a 500-foot table down the middle and invited everybody to the longest lunch in Paris. And everybody thought this wasn't going to work because these are Parisians, right? They're snobby to begin with, right? But guess what? It did work. We've all got the grumpy person inside us and also the sociable person. We're not one or the other. Those both exist. They existed in this guy and they existed in his neighbors. They showed up. They had this wonderful sort of festival of an afternoon. And then he took it the next step, which is he created what I would call a beautiful mess. He created some constraints, which is some clear riverbanks. And the riverbanks where you can organize, you're all free to organize in self-interest groups, in interest groups. If you're interested in bicycles, go over to this table. If you're interested in museums, go to this table. If you're interested in pets and dogs, go to this table. And you guys gather up in your interest groups and do whatever you want. If you want to organize bike rides in the bike group, do that. If you want to do bike repair, do that. Just find other people that share your interests. But the only rules of the gathering, there were two rules. One was no politics. Don't bring negative politics in here. And the second rule was, because France is divided just like we're divided, don't bring any negative politics. And the second rule was you must gather around a joy device, which means food, wine, coffee. And that's the only rules. And then he let people do whatever they want. And so that is how community happens. Community happens when you create a clear horizon, you create some clear guardrails. They can't do whatever you want. There are rules here. You have to gather in the joy device and there's no negativity and no politics. And then you have agency. You let people do what they want. Community is not about being obedient. Community is not about following instructions. Community is when two peers get together and say, how can we make this place better? That's community. That conversation, that action turns into messy, kind of annoying at times, but it turns into that's what community is. And so I think that's what a lot of people, one of the fun parts of writing this book is you get to hear what people are craving. You get to hear what people are wanting in this age as we see AI start to move into our world, as we see people divided. People are craving community. And so I think seeing these examples as sort of roadmaps for doing
Mhm.
that, like it's not magic. We sort of sometimes think that, oh, that great community over there, we see a great neighborhood or we see a great business or we see a great school, and we just attribute it because they're special. No, they've designed it. They've built these constraints, they've built a horizon, and they've empowered agency. They've sparked agency.
Well, I think that that label that you mentioned of being a designer is a key point in all of this as well. And you talked about France being divided like we are. As leaders are trying to bridge a disconnected, divided workforce, how can they use concepts like this to design more meaning, more community into their workplaces?
Yeah, no, that's really what a wonderful. Um, I guess I'd say a few things. The first is to attune to the power of small groups. Small groups. Good things happen when people are in groups where they can't hide, where their voice can be heard. Having people break into small groups and have discussions is one of the most powerful things you can do. Quick example of that, because I'm out here at spring training with the Cleveland Guardians. We are a small market team and we have to build better coaches. We have to have great coaches to compete. Other teams have way more money. They can sign players. We have to grow players here, actually. And we struggled to develop our coaches for many years until we used to sort of push expert practices on our coaches. Here's how good coaches coach, do that. We were sort of coercing them. One day we gathered them in small groups and we posed a question to them. Who's the best coach you ever had? And what did they do? Those small groups came alive with ideas, suggestions, models, templates, frameworks, drill designs. You turned from a situation where you're coercing people to do something. You're saying you need to do it this way, to go back to our original, asking that question, seeing the inherent worth in them and creating a question that they can explore. What a leadership move that was. And it's great as a leader because you don't have to have the answer. Your job is not to have the answer. Your job is to frame the question, to get a horizon where you're going. We need to get better. We need to figure out how to help every coach improve. That is our horizon. You need to create guardrails. We need these small groups that are going to discuss these questions, not a million questions, these questions. And then you give people agency. Having that play to run, like think of that as a leadership play.
Yeah.
That's the play. That's the play to run over and over again. So that's like number one. Number two is patience. You can't force this stuff. Your organization feels like a machine. It's not actually a machine. It's this more like a river. It's more like connective energy with riverbanks. And your role is to design space where that river can flow and where new things bubble up. And so the patience is when tolerate failure and imperfection, like embrace that as a leader. If you're not missing, you'll never hit new stuff. If you're not generating a certain percentage of failure, you're not trying enough, you're not taking risk. And so you want to create that kind of like noodles in a boiling pot kind of energy, where you're telling people, you're making it safe for them to explore, to take responsibility, take ownership. And you're waiting for something new to happen. Like this is where the patience comes in. And a lot of the leaders that I saw, there's Ed Catmull at Pixar was really, really good at this, because each movie at Pixar is given to a team. And so Catmull knows that you can give a great idea to a bad team and you get a bad movie. You can give a bad idea to a great team and they'll develop it into a great movie. And so he's trying to see what that team is like. And he's watching them from afar patiently. And then he's trying to see how they're interacting. And then one day, the team for this one movie, they decided they were building a movie about being in the outdoors. I forget which one it was, maybe Up. And they camped. They took a tent out to Pixar's yard and the team camped there. And Ed knew then, like he had created the conditions. He hadn't forced it, but he was so delighted and he radiated that delight and he spotlighted that act of them camping together. So the leader's job becomes less coercion and more waiting, creating conditions for good things to happen. And then when they do happen, to absolutely spotlight and celebrate that so that you direct more attention and energy at those good things. And that's how growth happens, not by dictating, but by spotlighting and celebrating those things.
The celebration. Love it. So hearing about Pixar makes me smile. It is now my opportunity to get to ask you, Dan, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
Martin Guitars. Martin Guitars. I've been some of these guys that I have some friends, we play music together, and I just got my first Martin guitar, and it's a special brand. Like to go back and see people playing Martin guitars from the 30s, and to see the way people care for them, and to see the way that I think they're made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. And you know that there's the band plays a song called The Wait.
Yeah.
Right. I pulled into Nazareth. I was feeling about half past
10. Yeah.
I could play that song. And it's like that's where that came from. He saw that name in his guitar. And so I don't know, that made me smile, and seeing to have a brand that's so, I don't know, deeply interwoven with the fabric of music in this country, is just, it makes you feel good. It makes you feel good to be around it.
Oh, I love it. A great smile. Dan, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, danielcoyle.com is a good place to start. And there's a link there. Send me a message. I get the messages. It's kind of a fun way to connect with folks. So that's awesome. A good place to go.
Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, as well as the new book, Flourish, in our show notes at onbrandpodcast.com. www.boardroom.com. Daniel Coyle, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thanks, Nick. Fun spending time with you. Thanks for your great questions.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.